The rain hammered against the cracked windows of the small diner on Route 66, creating a rhythm that matched the nervous tapping of Maria Santos's fingers against her coffee cup. She sat in the corner booth, hood pulled low over her weathered face, watching every car that pulled into the parking lot through eyes that had seen too much. At 52, she looked older than her years, carrying the weight of secrets that could destroy lives if they ever came to light. The bell above the door chimed, and Maria's body tensed automatically. An elderly man in a worn military jacket shuffled in, shaking raindrops from his gray hair. She studied him carefully, noting the slight limp in his left leg, the way he favored his right shoulder, the alert scanning of his eyes despite his age. Military, definitely. The question was whether he was friend or foe. Maria had been running for 3 years now, ever since that terrible night when everything she had worked for came crashing down. 3 years of sleeping in cheap motels, of dyeing her hair every few months, of never staying in one place too long. 3 years of wondering if today would be the day they finally caught up with her. The old soldier ordered coffee and a piece of apple pie, settling into a booth 3 tables away. Maria relaxed slightly but kept watching. In her line of work, paranoia wasn't a character flaw. It was a survival skill. She had learned that lesson the hard way, back when she still believed in things like justice and honor and serving your country. Her real name wasn't Maria Santos. That was just the latest in a long line of identities she had worn, like masks, each one discarded when it became too dangerous to maintain. She had been Sarah Mitchell once, a bright-eyed recruit fresh out of basic training, with dreams of making a difference. Before that, she had been the girl from Chicago's South Side who had joined the military to escape poverty and give her younger brother a chance at a better life. But those days felt like someone else's life now. Someone innocent and naive who believed that good always triumphed over evil, that the people in charge actually cared about doing the right thing. That girl had died somewhere in the mountains of Afghanistan, replaced by someone harder, colder, more pragmatic, someone who had earned a nickname that struck fear into the hearts of enemies and allies alike, Black Viper. The name still sent a chill down her spine even after all these years. She had never chosen it. Nicknames in special operations had a way of choosing themselves. It had started as a joke among her unit, a reference to her ability to strike without warning and disappear just as quickly. But as her reputation grew, the joke became legend, and the legend became something else entirely. Maria sipped her coffee and let her mind wander back to those days, despite knowing it would only bring pain. She had been good at what she did, too good perhaps. Her success had brought her to the attention of people who operated in shadows, who spoke in code names, and moved pieces on a global chessboard that ordinary citizens never saw. Colonel James Richardson had been one of those people. He had recruited her personally for a unit that didn't officially exist, for missions that never happened according to any government records. "We do the jobs that nobody else can do," he had told her during their first meeting. "The ones that require someone with your particular talents." At first, she had been honored. To be chosen for such an elite assignment felt like validation of all her hard work and sacrifice. The missions were classified at levels she had never dreamed of accessing. Briefings held in secure facilities buried deep underground. They told her she was serving her country in the highest possible way, that her actions would save countless innocent lives. The targets were always presented as clear-cut evil terrorists, planning attacks on American soil, weapons dealers selling to the highest bidder, corrupt officials enabling genocide in distant countries. The intelligence was always rock solid, they assured her. The need for immediate action was always urgent, and her record was always flawless. She became a ghost in the machine of global politics, eliminating problems that diplomacy couldn't solve and conventional military action couldn't reach. Her success rate was unprecedented. Her methods were efficient and clean, and slowly, without her realizing it, she was becoming something she had never intended to be. The first crack in her faith had come during a mission in Eastern Europe. The target was supposed to be a human trafficking kingpin, a monster who sold children to the highest bidder. But when she reached the location, she found not a criminal mastermind, but a journalist, a woman with a family, investigating corruption in her government. The woman's laptop contained evidence of American officials receiving bribes from defense contractors. documentation that would have exposed a network of corruption reaching into the highest levels of the Pentagon. Maria had hesitated for the first time in her career. The woman looked up at her with eyes full of fear and confusion, pleading in broken English for her life. "Please," she had whispered. "I have children. I was only trying to tell the truth." But her orders were clear, and she had been trained to follow orders without question. The woman died believing she was the victim of local gangsters, never knowing that her own government had marked her for elimination. Maria completed the mission and filed her report, but something fundamental had changed inside her. She started paying closer attention to the intelligence briefings, asking more questions about sources and verification. She began to notice inconsistencies in the stories she was told, discrepancies that didn't add up. And slowly, horrifyingly, she began to realize what she had really been doing all those years. The rain outside the diner intensified, and Maria pulled her jacket tighter around herself. The old soldier at the far table was reading a newspaper, seemingly paying no attention to her, but she could feel his awareness, like a physical presence. Military men never truly retired. They just learned to hide their vigilance better. Her phone buzzed softly, and she glanced at the screen. A text from an unknown number. Package delivered. Client satisfied. It was code, letting her know that her latest job had been completed successfully, not the kind of job she used to do. Those days were behind her forever. Now she worked in the gray areas of society, helping people who had nowhere else to turn. The irony wasn't lost on her. After years of being a weapon in the hands of corrupt officials, she had become something like a guardian angel for the forgotten and abandoned. Abused wives who needed to disappear from violent husbands. Whistleblowers whose lives were in danger from the very organizations they had tried to expose. People like herself, who had learned too much and needed to vanish before powerful forces silenced them permanently. She wasn't proud of how she made her living now, but it was honest work in its own way. She used the skills the government had taught her, but for causes she could believe in. It didn't erase what she had done in the past, but it was something. The bell above the door chimed again, and two men in expensive suits entered. They moved with the controlled precision of professional hunters, their eyes scanning the room systematically. Maria's blood turned to ice as she recognized the type. Corporate security, probably ex-military themselves, the kind of people who asked questions later and shot first. She kept her head down and tried to look invisible, but she could feel their attention settling on her like a weight. One of them approached the counter while the other positioned himself near the door. Classic containment positioning. They were here for her. Her mind raced through options. The back exit was blocked by kitchen staff, who would surely remember a woman rushing through in panic. The front door was covered. The bathroom window was too small for an adult to fit through. She was trapped in a place with limited cover and no good escape routes. The man at the counter was showing something to the waitress, probably her photo. The waitress glanced in her direction, then back at the photo, uncertainty clear on her face. Maria had maybe 30 seconds before they made their move. That's when the old soldier stood up. He moved with surprising speed for someone his age, approaching the counter with a friendly smile. "Excuse me," he said loudly enough for the entire diner to hear, "but aren't you fellows a little overdressed for this weather? Those suits must cost more than most folks around here make in a month." The suited men tried to ignore him, but he persisted. "I couldn't help but notice you seemed to be looking for someone. Official business? You boys with the government?" His tone was casual, but Maria caught the steel underneath it. The voice of a man who had commanded others in dangerous places. "Just routine inquiries, sir," one of the men replied stiffly. "Nothing to concern yourself with," the old soldier chuckled. "Well, that's good to hear. See? I spent 35 years in the service, and I learned to spot trouble from a mile away. Something about the way you fellows carry yourselves reminds me of the kind of people who used to make problems disappear back in my day. You know what I mean?" The atmosphere in the diner had shifted. Other patrons were now watching the exchange, sensing tension even if they didn't understand its source. The suited men found themselves the center of unwanted attention, their professional anonymity compromised. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation outside," one of them suggested. "Oh, I don't think that's necessary," the old soldier replied cheerfully, "unless you fellows have some kind of warrant or badge to show. Because if you don't, then you're just regular citizens like the rest of us, aren't you?" Maria used the distraction to slip quietly toward the rear of the diner. Her years of training took over, moving her through the restaurant like smoke, unnoticed by anyone focused on the confrontation at the counter. She reached the kitchen entrance just as she heard one of the suited men speak into a radio. "Control, this is Team 2. We have a complication. There's an old-timer here causing interference." The response crackled back. "Handle it quietly. The package is priority 1. Maria's blood chilled at the cold professionalism in the voice. These weren't just corporate security. They were professionals, the kind of people her former handlers would have used for wet work. Whatever they wanted with her, it wasn't going to end with polite questions. She slipped into the kitchen, startling a teenage dishwasher. "Back exit?" she whispered urgently. He pointed toward a door marked "Employees Only," and she was through it before he could process what had happened. The alley behind the diner was dark and filled with overflowing dumpsters, but it was freedom. She could hear raised voices from inside the restaurant as the situation escalated. As she moved toward the street, she heard footsteps behind her. One of the suited men had circled around to cut off her escape. She turned to face him, her body automatically shifting into a combat stance despite the years that had passed since her last real fight. "Easy there," the man said, holding up one hand while the other moved toward something under his jacket. "We just want to talk. There are some people who would very much like to have a conversation with the famous Black Viper." The name hung in the air between them like a death sentence. They knew exactly who she was, which meant her carefully constructed new identity was blown. Worse, it meant they had access to classified files that should have been buried so deep that no civilian organization could reach them. "I'm afraid you have me confused with someone else," Maria said calmly, though her muscles were coiled to strike. "My name is Maria Santos. I work at a grocery store in Tucson." The man smiled without warmth. "Maria Santos, Sarah Mitchell, Jennifer Walsh, Rebecca Turner. You've had a lot of names over the years, but there's only ever been one Black Viper. And some very important people would like that person to come back to work." "I'm retired," she said flatly. "Nobody retires from your line of work. They just take extended vacations." He took a step closer and Maria could see the bulge of a weapon beneath his jacket. "The people I represent are prepared to be very generous, much more generous than your current freelance arrangements." Before Maria could respond, the back door of the diner burst open and the old soldier emerged. He took in the scene at a glance. Maria backed against a wall, the suited man's hand near his weapon, the tension crackling between them like electricity. "Well now," he said conversationally, "this looks like the kind of private conversation that shouldn't be happening in a public alley." The suited man spun toward him, irritation flashing across his features. "Old man, this is none of your business. Walk away before—" He never finished the sentence. The old soldier moved with fluid precision, covering the distance between them in 2 steps. His hand struck the man's wrist with surgical accuracy, sending his partially drawn weapon clattering across the wet pavement. A follow-up strike to the solar plexus dropped the suited man to his knees, gasping for air. 40 years of hand-to-hand combat training, the old soldier explained mildly as he kicked the gun further away. "Muscle memory is a wonderful thing." Maria stared at him in shock. The frail-looking elderly man had just neutralized a professional operative with moves that spoke of extensive military training. This wasn't some good Samaritan stepping in to help. This was someone with serious skills of his own. "Who are you?" she demanded. Before he could answer, shouts erupted from inside the diner. The second suited man would be joining them soon, probably with backup not far behind. The old soldier grabbed her arm with surprising gentleness. "Someone who knew Black Viper when she was still Sarah Mitchell," he said quietly. "Someone who's been looking for her for a very long time. And right now, someone who's offering her a way out of this alley before more trouble arrives." Maria looked into his eyes and saw something that made her decision. Trust had become a foreign concept to her over the past few years. But sometimes you had to choose between the devil you knew and the one you didn't. At least this devil had just saved her life. "Lead the way," she said. They ran together through the maze of alleys behind the strip mall, the old soldier moving with surprising speed and stamina. Behind them, she could hear pursuit beginning, car doors slamming, radios crackling, the organized chaos of a manhunt getting underway. As they reached his battered pickup truck parked 2 blocks away, Maria couldn't shake the feeling that her carefully constructed new life was about to come crashing down around her ears. Again. But for the first time in 3 years, she wasn't running alone. The old soldier started the engine as she climbed into the passenger seat. "Buckle up," he said with a grim smile. "I have a feeling this is going to be a bumpy ride." As they pulled away from the curb, Maria caught sight of black SUVs converging on the diner in her side mirror. Professional, coordinated, expensive. Whoever wanted her back in the game wasn't taking no for an answer. "I don't suppose you'd care to tell me who you really are?" she asked as they merged onto the highway. The old soldier glanced at her, and for just a moment she saw through the civilian disguise to the soldier beneath. "Colonel James Richardson, retired," he said quietly, "though I suspect you already guessed that." Maria's world tilted on its axis. Richardson, her former commanding officer, the man who had recruited her into the shadows, the one person who knew all her secrets, the man she had trusted completely, right up until she learned how completely he had betrayed that trust. "Hello, Sarah," he said softly. "I think it's time we had that conversation we should have had 3 years ago." The rain continued to fall as they drove into the darkness, 2 ghosts from a shared past racing toward an uncertain future. Behind them, the lights of the pursuing vehicles grew smaller but never disappeared entirely. The hunt was on, and Maria realized with crystal clarity that her running days were about to come to an end, one way or another. The question was whether she would be standing when the dust settled, or if the secret she carried would finally drag her down into the darkness where Black Viper had been born. The safe house was nothing like what Maria had expected. Instead of some sterile military facility or anonymous hotel room, Colonel Richardson had brought her to a small farmhouse nestled in the rolling hills outside Nashville. The porch light cast a warm glow over weathered wooden steps, and the sound of crickets filled the humid night air. It felt almost normal, dangerously normal for someone who had spent the last 3 years living like a hunted animal. Richardson cut the engine and sat quietly for a moment, his hands still gripping the steering wheel. In the dim light from the dashboard, Maria could see the weight of years etched in the lines around his eyes. This wasn't the confident commanding officer she remembered from her special operations days. This was an old man, carrying burdens that had bent his shoulders and stolen his sleep. "Why here?" Maria asked, breaking the silence that had stretched between them for most of the 3-hour drive. "Because it's mine," Richardson replied simply. "Bought it with my pension when I retired. No government connections, no official records linking it to any operations, just an old soldier's retreat, where he can tend his garden and pretend the world makes sense." They climbed the steps together, Richardson's limp more pronounced now that he was tired. The front door opened before they reached it, revealing a woman in her 50s with graying hair and intelligent eyes. She looked at Maria with the practiced assessment of someone who had seen dangerous people before and knew how to recognize them. "This is my wife, Helen," Richardson said. "Helen, meet Sarah." Helen nodded once, no surprise or fear in her expression. "The spare room is ready," she said simply. "Coffee's fresh, and there's soup if you're hungry." It was such a normal domestic moment that Maria felt disoriented. After years of cheap motels and constant vigilance, the simple kindness in Helen's voice was almost overwhelming. She realized she had forgotten what it felt like to be welcomed anywhere without suspicion or ulterior motives. The kitchen was warm and lived in, with mismatched chairs around a scarred wooden table and photographs covering the refrigerator. Grandchildren, vacation pictures, the ordinary artifacts of a life well lived. Richardson poured coffee while Helen ladled soup into bowls, moving around each other with the easy choreography of a long marriage. "James told me some of what you've been going through," Helen said as they sat down to eat. "I want you to know that whatever happened in the past, you're safe here. This is neutral ground." Maria looked between them, searching for the angle, the hidden agenda. In her experience, there was always a catch. Always someone looking to use her for their own purposes. But Richardson and his wife simply waited patiently, letting her process their offer of sanctuary at her own pace. "You said we needed to have a conversation," Maria said finally, addressing Richardson, "about what happened 3 years ago." Richardson's face darkened, and he set down his coffee cup, with careful precision. About what I discovered after you disappeared, yes, and about why those men found you tonight. Start with why you're here, Maria said. Why were you at that diner? That wasn't a coincidence. No, it wasn't. Richardson reached into his jacket and pulled out a smartphone, swiping through several screens before handing it to her. I've been tracking the teams hunting for you, not to help them, to help you. That diner was their latest lead, and I barely got there in time. The phone showed a map with several red dots scattered across the country, each one labeled with dates and locations. Maria recognized most of them. Places she had stopped during her 3 years on the run. They had been following her trail systematically, getting closer with each passing month. How did they get this information? She asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. The same way they got authorization to form those teams in the first place, Richardson said grimly. Someone very high up the food chain wants you back in the game, and they're not taking your retirement lying down. Helen reached across the table and squeezed her husband's hand. A small gesture of support that spoke of shared burdens and long conversations in the dark hours of the night. Maria realized that Richardson's wife knew everything, or at least enough to understand why her husband had been carrying such weight these past few years. Tell her the rest of it, Helen said softly. Richardson took a deep breath. After you went off the grid, I started asking questions. Quietly at first, I thought maybe you had just burned out, needed some time to decompress. But when weeks turned into months with no word, I began to worry. So I started digging into our old operations, trying to understand what might have spooked you. He paused, staring into his coffee as if it held answers to questions he was afraid to ask. What I found would have destroyed my faith in everything I believed in if I'd had any faith left to destroy. Maria felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. What did you find? Operation Clean Slate, Richardson said quietly. Ever heard of it? She shook her head, but something in his tone made her stomach clench with dread. It was a compartmentalized program so secret that even I only learned about it by accident when I was reviewing classified archives for my retirement debriefing. The basic premise was elegant in its simplicity. Eliminate anyone who had knowledge of certain classified operations before they could become a liability. The room seemed to grow colder as the implications sank in. Eliminate how? Car accidents, heart attacks, suicides, overdoses. All very tragic, all very natural looking. Richardson's voice was flat, clinical, the tone of a man reporting facts too horrible for emotion. 37 former operatives over the past 5 years, all people who had worked on missions similar to the ones you conducted. All people who might have started asking awkward questions about what they had really been doing. Maria's soup grew cold as she stared at him, understanding creeping over her like ice water. They're killing their own people. Not all of them. Only the ones who showed signs of developing a conscience. Only the ones who might eventually become whistleblowers. He looked up at her, and she saw guilt and rage warring in his eyes. People like you, Sarah. People who started asking too many questions. The silence stretched between them, heavy with implications. Maria thought about the journalist in Eastern Europe, about all the other targets she had eliminated without question. How many of them had been innocent people whose only crime was knowing too much? How many families had she destroyed on the orders of people who saw human lives as nothing more than chess pieces to be sacrificed? The men at the diner, she said slowly. They weren't trying to recruit me. They were there to add you to the casualty list. Yes, Richardson confirmed. But they want to make it look voluntary. A former special operations soldier, suffering from PTSD, takes her own life after years of running from her demons. Very sad, very believable, and very final. Helen stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. I'm sorry, but I can't listen to this anymore, she said, her voice thick with emotion. I'm going to check the perimeter, make sure we weren't followed. She kissed Richardson on the top of his head before leaving, a gesture of comfort and connection that reminded Maria of everything she had given up when she chose the life of a shadow warrior. Relationships, normalcy, the simple pleasure of sharing a meal with people who cared about her, it all seemed like luxuries from another world. After Helen left, Richardson reached across the table and covered Maria's hand with his own. His skin was rough from years of outdoor work, scarred from old battles, but his touch was gentle. "I failed you," he said quietly. "I recruited you, trained you, sent you on those missions believing we were serving a greater good. I never questioned the intelligence we received, never dug deeper into the real motivations behind our targets. I was a good soldier following orders, and because of that, I turned you into something you were never meant to be." Maria pulled her hand away, not because she was angry, but because the kindness in his touch was threatening to break down walls she had built to survive. "You weren't the only one making choices, Colonel. I could have walked away at any time." "Could you?" he asked. "Could any of us once you're inside that world? Once you know the secrets they told us to keep, leaving becomes complicated. They make sure of that." They sat in silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. Outside, Maria could hear Helen moving around the property, checking windows and doors with the methodical precision of someone who had done this many times before. It struck her that Richardson's wife was as much a part of this resistance as he was, a civilian who had chosen to stand by a man whose past made them both targets. "What's the plan?" Maria asked finally. "You didn't rescue me from that alley just to give me a hot meal and a safe place to sleep. What do you want from me?" Richardson smiled for the first time since she had known who he really was. "I want to give you a choice. A real choice this time. Not orders disguised as options." He pulled out a thick manila envelope from his jacket and placed it on the table between them. "This contains everything I've gathered about Operation Clean Slate. Names, dates, bank records, operational plans. Enough evidence to expose the whole network if it reaches the right hands." Maria stared at the envelope as if it were a live grenade. "And you want me to deliver it?" "I want you to decide what happens to it," Richardson corrected. "You could take it to the media, blow the whole thing wide open. You could deliver it to congressional oversight committees, let them handle it through official channels. Or you could walk away from all of this, take a new identity I've prepared, and disappear permanently. The choice is yours. What about you? What happens to you if this comes out?" Richardson's smile turned sad. "I'm 73 years old, Sarah. My fighting days are behind me, but my conscience isn't going to let me take these secrets to my grave. Whatever consequences come from exposing this, I can live with them. What I can't live with is knowing what we did and doing nothing to make it right." Maria opened the envelope and scanned the first few pages. The documents were damning, detailed operational plans, financial transfers, coded communications that spelled out a systematic program of murder disguised as coincidence. It was enough to bring down careers, end political ambitions, and potentially land dozens of powerful people in prison. It was also enough to get everyone involved in exposing it killed. "Why not just release this yourself?" she asked. "Because I'm a tired old man that nobody listens to anymore," Richardson said bluntly. "But Black Viper, she's a legend. Her word carries weight in certain circles. If she comes forward with this evidence, people will pay attention. Black Viper is dead," Maria said firmly. "She died 3 years ago when I walked away from all this. Did she? Or did she just go underground, waiting for the right moment to strike back at the people who betrayed everything she once believed in?" The question hung in the air between them, challenging and uncomfortable. Maria realized that part of her had never really let go of that identity, the part that had taken pride in her skills, that had found meaning in being the best at something important. She had buried Black Viper, but perhaps she had never truly killed her. Helen returned from her security check, bringing with her the fresh scent of night air and the subtle tension of someone who had spent years living with danger. She looked at the envelope on the table and then at her husband. "Any company out there?" Richardson asked. "All quiet for now," Helen replied. "But there are fresh tire tracks on the access road that weren't there this afternoon. Someone's been watching the place." The information hit Maria like a physical blow. "They followed us here. I've put you both in danger just by being here." "No," Richardson said firmly. "We put ourselves in danger the day we decided to stand up to these people. Having you here doesn't change that equation. It just means we're not fighting alone anymore." Maria looked around the kitchen again, taking in the photographs and personal touches that made this place a home. The thought of bringing violence to this peaceful sanctuary made her sick. These people had already sacrificed enough for their principles. "I need to leave," she said, standing up abruptly. "Tonight, before they decide to make their move. I won't be responsible for getting you killed." "Sit down, Sarah," Helen said quietly. The steel in her voice was unmistakable, and Maria found herself obeying before she realized it. "You think this is the first time we've been through something like this? You think James has been fighting this battle alone?" Richardson reached across the table and squeezed his wife's hand. "Helen has been helping me gather intelligence for the past 2 years. She's the one who identified half the names in that file, using her connections from 20 years as a State Department analyst." Maria stared at them both, pieces clicking into place. "You've been planning this for a long time."
"We've been preparing," Helen corrected.
"Waiting for the right moment, the right opportunity. When those teams started hunting for you, we knew that opportunity was coming. They were scared enough of what you might know that they were willing to break cover to silence you. That told us you were the key to bringing them down." The realization was both flattering and terrifying. She had been running from these people for 3 years, thinking she was fighting for her own survival. But in reality, she had been the bait in a larger trap, drawing out the very people Richardson and his wife were trying to expose. "What if I say no?" Maria asked. "What if I take that new identity and disappear?" Richardson and Helen exchanged a look that spoke of long conversations and difficult decisions. "Then we'll respect your choice and do everything we can to make sure you get away safely," Richardson said. "But we'll also continue this fight without you, and frankly, our chances of success will be much lower." "And if I say yes? If I agree to be Black Viper one more time? Then we stop running and start hunting," Helen said simply. "We take the fight to them before they can kill any more innocent people." Maria felt the weight of the decision settling on her shoulders. For 3 years, she had been focused on nothing but survival, on staying one step ahead of the people who wanted her dead. The idea of going on the offensive, of becoming the hunter instead of the hunted, was both appealing and terrifying. Outside, the first light of dawn was beginning to creep across the horizon. Time was running out. Whoever was watching the farmhouse would make their move soon, probably under cover of early morning darkness. If she was going to make a decision, it had to be now. She thought about the journalist in Eastern Europe, about all the other innocent people she had killed, on orders from men who served their own interests rather than their country's. She thought about the 37 former operatives who had died to keep those men's secrets safe. She thought about the families destroyed, the lives cut short, the truth buried under layers of classified documents and official denials. Then she thought about the choice Richardson was offering her. Not just survival, but redemption. Not just escape, but justice. Black Viper had been created by people who perverted everything she had once believed in. Maybe it was time for Black Viper to return the favor. Maria reached across the table and picked up the manila envelope, feeling its weight in her hands. "Tell me about the plan," she said quietly. Richardson smiled, and for the first time since she had known him, it reached his eyes. "The first step is making sure we all survive the next few hours. After that, we're going to remind some very powerful people why they should have left sleeping vipers alone." Outside, the sky continued to lighten, bringing with it the promise of answers and the threat of violence. Maria Santos was about to disappear forever, but something far more dangerous was about to take her place. The hunters were about to discover that their prey had teeth of her own, and she was very, very tired of running. The attack came at 4:30 in the morning. Just as Richardson had predicted. Maria was awake in the guest bedroom when she heard the first soft footstep on the porch stairs, her body automatically tensing at the sound that was almost inaudible above the pre-dawn chorus of insects. 3 years of living as prey had sharpened her senses to an almost supernatural degree. She rolled off the bed and moved to the window in one fluid motion, peering through the crack in the curtains. 4 figures in tactical gear were approaching the house from different angles, their movements coordinated and professional. These weren't the same corporate security types from the diner. These were military operators, the kind of people who ended problems permanently and quietly. A soft knock on her door preceded Richardson's whispered voice. "Sarah, they're here." She opened the door to find the old colonel fully dressed and carrying what looked like a military-grade communications device. Despite his age, his eyes were alert and focused. The civilian facade completely dropped in favor of the soldier underneath.
4 on the ground level, probably more as backup, she whispered.
Entry in 60 seconds, maybe less.
Helen's already in the safe room, he replied, handing her a tactical vest and a pistol.
There's an escape tunnel that leads to the old storm cellar about 200 yards into the woods. If things go badly, get to the cellar and wait for my signal. Maria strapped on the vest and checked the weapon automatically, muscle memory taking over. And if your signal never comes, then you take that evidence and find another way to get it out, Richardson said grimly. But let's not plan on that scenario just yet. The sound of breaking glass from downstairs ended their conversation. The attack had begun. Richardson moved with surprising speed for a man his age, leading Maria down a back hallway she hadn't noticed the night before. The house was larger than it appeared from outside, with hidden passages and reinforced rooms that spoke of long planning and careful preparation. This wasn't just a retirement home, it was a fortress designed to look like a farmhouse. They reached a concealed staircase just as the first tactical team breached the front door. Maria could hear boots on hardwood floors, the crackle of radio communications, the systematic clearing of rooms below, professional, efficient, and thoroughly lethal. The basement was a revelation. Banks of computer monitors, communication equipment, and enough weapons to outfit a small military unit. Helen sat at a central console, her fingers flying over multiple keyboards as surveillance feeds from around the property displayed their attackers' positions. 8 total, Helen reported without looking up from her screens. 4 inside, 4 maintaining perimeter. 2 vehicles on the access road probably containing backup teams. Richardson moved to a weapons rack and selected an assault rifle with the familiarity of someone who had handled such tools for decades. Remember, these aren't government agents anymore. They're mercenaries working for private interests. That means no rules of engagement beyond completing their mission. The distinction was important. Government operatives, even corrupt ones, still had to maintain some pretense of legal authority. Private contractors answered to no one but their employers and had no constraints beyond their contracts. They would burn down the farmhouse with all 3 of them inside if necessary. A new sound reached them from upstairs. Measured footsteps, systematic and patient. The tactical team wasn't rushing their search. They knew their targets were trapped and were taking time to ensure no one escaped. "There's another way out," Maria said, recognizing the tactics. "They're not planning to take prisoners." "No, they're not," Richardson agreed, "which gives us a certain freedom in how we respond." He moved to another console and began typing rapidly. On one of Helen's monitors, Maria watched as security systems throughout the house activated, steel shutters sliding across windows, reinforced doors locking automatically, ventilation systems switching to filtered air. The farmhouse was transforming into a bunker. "That should slow them down," Richardson said with satisfaction. This place was designed to withstand anything short of military-grade explosives. Helen looked up from her console with a worried expression. "James, I'm picking up thermal signatures on 2 more vehicles approaching from the north. Looks like they called for reinforcements." The math was getting worse by the minute. Even with the house's defenses, they were outnumbered and outgunned. Sooner or later, the attackers would either breach the safe room or simply wait them out. Unless they changed the dynamic of the situation, this would end badly for all of them. Maria felt something shift inside her mind, a familiar coldness that she hadn't experienced in 3 years. Black Viper had been a predator, not prey. She had been trained to turn disadvantages into advantages, to strike from unexpected angles when direct confrontation was impossible. "The tunnel you mentioned," she said to Richardson. "Where exactly does it come out?" He pulled up a schematic on one of the monitors. "Storm cellar here, about 50 yards behind their perimeter. It's concealed and should be undetected, but once you're outside, you'll be on your own." Maria studied the layout, her mind automatically calculating angles, timing, and opportunities. The attacking team had positioned themselves to contain the house, but they hadn't expected their targets to be able to project force outside the building. That gave her a crucial advantage. "Give me 20 minutes, she said, checking her equipment one final time. "Then create the loudest distraction you can manage." Ellen looked alarmed. "Sarah, you can't take on 8 trained operators by yourself.
I'm not going to, Maria replied, her voice taking on the flat, professional tone of Black Viper.
I'm going to make them take on each other. The tunnel was exactly as Richardson had described. A narrow passage lined with concrete blocks, clearly built for emergencies but maintained with military precision. Maria crawled through it with practiced silence, her mind already shifting into the cold, analytical state that had made her reputation in special operations. She emerged from the storm cellar into a landscape transformed by tactical night vision. The farmhouse was lit up like a Christmas tree with infrared targeting lasers, while shadowy figures moved through the surrounding woods with professional efficiency. They had indeed brought reinforcements. She counted at least 12 operatives now, all heavily armed and coordinated through sophisticated communication equipment. But they had made one crucial mistake. They were operating under the assumption that their targets were civilians. Dangerous civilians, perhaps, but still people who would follow normal patterns of behavior like hiding, calling for help, or attempting to escape. They weren't prepared for someone who thought like they did, who understood their tactics and could turn those tactics against them. Maria circled wide through the forest, using shadows and natural cover to avoid the outer perimeter guards. Her target wasn't the house or even the attack teams directly. It was their command and control structure. Every military operation depended on communication and coordination. Disrupt those, and even the best-trained team would start making mistakes. She found what she was looking for in a small clearing about 300 yards from the house. A mobile command post with sophisticated radio equipment and 2 operators monitoring the assault. They were focused on the tactical displays showing their team's positions, confident in their overwhelming advantage. The first operator never saw her coming. Maria's knife found the gap between his body armor and helmet with surgical precision, dropping him silently to the forest floor. The second operator had just enough time to realize something was wrong before a blood choke sent him into unconsciousness. But rather than destroying the command post, Maria began working with its equipment. Years of training in communication warfare had taught her exactly how to turn an enemy's advantages into weapons against them. She began transmitting false orders on their tactical frequencies using the command codes she had observed during her brief surveillance. Alpha Team, abort house entry and move to secondary positions, she transmitted in the crisp, professional tone of a mission controller. We have new intelligence indicating the targets may have explosive devices. The response was immediate. Through the night vision scope she had taken from the command post, Maria watched as the tactical teams inside the house began withdrawing, following orders they believed were coming from their commanders. Bravo, team! We have confirmed civilian casualties in the target zone, she continued, switching to a different frequency. Local law enforcement may be responding. Expedite extraction protocols. The psychological effect was exactly what she had hoped for. Professional mercenaries might be willing to kill for money, but they weren't eager to face murder charges or engage with local police who might complicate their escape routes. She could see confusion beginning to spread through their ranks as conflicting orders created uncertainty. Maria continued her disinformation campaign, gradually escalating the fictional crisis. Reports of incoming law enforcement, concerns about media attention, warnings about potential government oversight. Each transmission was carefully calculated to exploit the fears and concerns that would matter most to mercenaries operating outside legal authority. But her advantage was temporary. Sooner or later, the team leaders would realize their communications were compromised and either switch to backup frequencies or simply ignore radio traffic entirely. She needed to create a more permanent disruption. That's when she spotted the vehicles. The attackers had positioned 2 SUVs on the access road as blocking positions, preventing escape by vehicle while providing heavy firepower support if needed. But those same vehicles represented a significant investment for their employers. Expensive, heavily modified, and equipped with specialized gear that would be difficult to replace quickly. Maria made her way through the forest toward the road, moving with the patient stalking techniques that had earned her the Viper nickname. The vehicles were guarded, but only lightly. Their operators clearly believed the real threat was contained inside the farmhouse. She reached the first SUV undetected and quickly identified its weaknesses. The fuel tank, the communications array, the engine block. All vulnerable to someone with the right knowledge and tools. But simple sabotage wouldn't be enough.
She needed to create chaos, not just inconvenience.
Working quickly, Maria rigged both vehicles with improvised explosive devices using materials from her tactical kit. Not enough to cause serious casualties. She wasn't interested in becoming a mass murderer, but sufficient to destroy the vehicles and create the kind of dramatic confusion that would panic the remaining attackers. As she finished her work, the radio on her belt crackled with increasing desperation. The attack teams were starting to realize that something was seriously wrong with their operation. Voices were raised, orders were being questioned, and the disciplined coordination that had marked their initial assault was beginning to break down. "Control, this is Alpha Leader," came one transmission. "We're getting contradictory orders down here. Request confirmation of current mission parameters. All teams, this is Bravo Leader. I'm not reading any thermal signatures inside the target building. Possible the subjects have escaped through unknown means." Perfect, Maria thought as she activated the timers on her explosive devices. Time to add some fireworks to their confusion. The explosions came 30 seconds apart, lighting up the pre-dawn darkness with brilliant flashes that temporarily blinded anyone using night vision equipment. The sound was deafening in the quiet forest, and the destruction of their expensive vehicles sent a clear message. Their prey had not only escaped the trap, but had turned hunter. Through her commandeered night vision scope, Maria watched the attack team's carefully planned operation collapse into chaos. Operators were shouting contradictory orders, some moving toward the burning vehicles while others maintained positions around the now apparently empty farmhouse. Their professional discipline was cracking under the pressure of an enemy who refused to behave like a victim. She keyed her stolen radio one final time. "All teams, this is Actual Control," she transmitted in the coldest, most authoritative voice she could manage. "Operation is compromised. We have multiple law enforcement agencies en route and potential federal oversight. Execute immediate extraction. This is Black Viper. Your hunt is over." The effect was electric. Every radio frequency went silent for several seconds as the implications sank in. Then came the flood of panicked chatter as professional mercenaries realized they had been hunting a legend, and that the legend was hunting them back. Maria didn't wait to observe the full retreat. She was already moving back toward the farmhouse, knowing that Richardson and Helen would be monitoring the situation and preparing for the next phase of their operation. The immediate threat was neutralized, but this was only the beginning of a much larger battle. As she made her way through the forest, Maria felt the familiar satisfaction of a successful mission, but this time, it was different. This time, she was fighting for something she believed in rather than following orders from people she didn't trust. This time, Black Viper was serving justice instead of hidden agendas. The war against Operation Clean Slate was just beginning, and she intended to finish what they had started. The hunters had become the hunted, and Maria was going to make sure they understood exactly what that meant. By the time she reached the storm cellar, the sounds of vehicles retreating down the access road echoed through the forest. The attack had failed, and their enemies would now have to regroup and reconsider their approach. That would buy her and the Richardsons time to take the initiative and strike back. As she emerged from the tunnel into the farmhouse basement, Helen looked up from her monitors with relief and admiration. 12 professional operators, and you sent them running with their tails between their legs. "They'll be back," Maria said simply, checking her equipment. "Next time with more people and better planning. We need to move fast if we're going to stay ahead of them." Richardson nodded approvingly. Black Viper always did know how to change the terms of engagement. But you're right, we've bought ourselves time, not victory. The real fight starts now. Outside, the sun was beginning to rise over the Tennessee hills, casting long shadows across the farmhouse that had survived its first test as a fortress. But Maria knew that the coming day would bring new challenges and new dangers. The people behind Operation Clean Slate would not give up easily, and they had resources that went far beyond mercenary assault teams. The game had changed, and both sides knew it. But for the first time in 3 years, Maria felt like she was fighting on the right side of a war that actually mattered. Black Viper was back, and this time, she was fighting for redemption rather than orders. The real battle was about to begin. 3 weeks after the attack on the farmhouse, Maria sat in a secure communication booth deep beneath the federal building in Washington, D.C., watching as the most powerful people in American intelligence tried to process what they were hearing. The evidence spread across the conference table, told a story of corruption, murder, and betrayal that reached into the highest levels of government. Senator Elizabeth Warren, chair of the Intelligence Oversight Committee, held up a photograph that showed a man Maria recognized, David Kellner, the deputy director of a classified agency so secret it had no official name. In the photo, he was shaking hands with Viktor Petrov, a Russian arms dealer whom Maria had been ordered to eliminate 2 years earlier. This photograph was taken 6 months before you were sent to kill Mr. Petrov, Senator Warren said, her voice carefully controlled. Can you explain why Deputy Director Kellner would be meeting with a target he would later order you to eliminate? Maria leaned forward slightly, her voice carrying the flat precision of someone testifying under oath. Petrov had evidence of American officials selling weapons to terrorist organizations through intermediaries. Kellner was one of those officials. When Petrov tried to blackmail him, Kellner used our unit to solve his personal problem. The room erupted in murmurs and whispered conversations. Maria had been testifying for 3 hours, walking the committee through a carefully documented series of assassinations that had been presented as counterterrorism operations, but were actually contract killings disguised as patriotic duty. Richardson sat at the table beside her, no longer the tired old farmer she had met in that Tennessee diner. Wearing his dress uniform with 4 rows of ribbons, he projected the authority of someone who had served his country with distinction for over 3 decades. His presence gave weight to Maria's testimony that no amount of evidence alone could have provided. The pattern was consistent, Richardson continued when Maria finished. Our unit was used to eliminate inconvenient witnesses, whistleblowers, and anyone who threatened to expose the criminal activities of highly placed officials. We were told we were fighting terrorists, but we were actually serving as executioners for a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of government. Senator Warren nodded grimly. And you have documentation supporting these allegations? Helen Richardson stepped forward from her position against the wall, carrying a briefcase that contained 3 years of meticulous investigation. Bank records showing payments from defense contractors to numbered accounts controlled by Operation Clean Slate personnel. Communication intercepts proving coordination between targets and the officials who ordered their deaths. Financial records documenting the cover-up operations that made their murders look accidental. The evidence was overwhelming, but Maria could see skepticism in some of the committee members' faces. What she was describing sounded like something from a paranoid conspiracy theory, not reality. The scope of the corruption was so vast that accepting it required acknowledging that fundamental institutions had been compromised at their core. Mrs. Mitchell, said Senator James Crawford, a ranking Republican member of the committee. These are serious allegations you're making against highly respected intelligence officials. Do you have any proof beyond your personal testimony and documents that could have been fabricated? Maria had expected this question. She reached into her jacket and pulled out a small recording device, placing it on the table with deliberate precision. This contains a conversation I had with Deputy Director Kellner 2 days ago. He believes he was meeting with a potential recruit for a new operation. Instead, he was confessing to conspiracy, murder, and treason. She pressed play, and Kellner's voice filled the room through high-quality speakers. The recording was crystal clear, every word audible as he outlined plans for expanding Operation Clean Slate to eliminate congressional investigators who were getting too close to the truth. The beauty of the system, Kellner's recorded voice explained, is that we control both the intelligence and the response. We identify the threats, and we eliminate them using assets that officially don't exist. No one can trace the orders back to us because the orders are never officially given. Senator Crawford's face went white as he listened to a man he had worked with for years casually discussing murder as a solution to political problems. Around the table, other committee members showed similar reactions: shock, horror, and the dawning realization that their worst fears about government overreach were actually conservative estimates. The recording continued for another 10 minutes, with Kellner detailing specific operations and naming names of other officials involved in the conspiracy. By the time it ended, the room was completely silent except for the hum of air conditioning and the distant sound of Washington traffic. "How did you get this recording?" Senator Warren asked quietly. "I told him I was interested in coming back to work," Maria said simply. Men like Kellner believe their own mythology. He thought Black Viper was too valuable an asset to leave in retirement, and he was eager to recruit me for his expanded operations. His arrogance made him careless. What she didn't mention was the weeks of careful preparation that had gone into that meeting. Richardson's intelligence network had identified Kellner's patterns, his weaknesses, his psychological profile. Ellen's technical expertise had provided the recording equipment and surveillance support. It had been a textbook intelligence operation, planned and executed with military precision. But the real masterstroke had been simpler than any of that. Maria had simply told Kellner what he wanted to hear. That she was tired of running, tired of hiding, ready to come back to the world where she had once been powerful and respected. His ego had done the rest. Senator Warren stood up, her expression grim with determination. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a constitutional crisis on our hands. We're looking at evidence of a shadow organization operating within our intelligence community that has murdered American citizens and foreign nationals based on personal rather than national interests." She turned to address Maria directly. "Mrs. Mitchell, you understand that by coming forward with this information, you're likely to face criminal charges yourself for your role in these operations?" Maria nodded. "I understand. I also understand that some things are more important than personal consequences. The people I killed deserve justice, and their families deserve the truth. If prosecuting me is part of that process, I accept it." The honesty in her answer seemed to affect the committee members more than any of the evidence had. Here was someone who had committed terrible acts in service to corrupt masters, but who was willing to face the consequences of exposing the truth. It gave her testimony a moral weight that was impossible to dismiss. Richardson leaned forward. "Senator, with respect, prosecuting the weapons used in these crimes while ignoring the hands that directed them would be a miscarriage of justice." Mrs. Mitchell was a soldier following orders she believed were legitimate. The people who gave those orders, who perverted the system for personal gain, are the real criminals here. "That's for the courts to decide," Senator Warren replied. "But I want to assure all of you that this committee will recommend full immunity for anyone willing to testify truthfully about Operation Clean Slate and related activities. Our priority is dismantling this conspiracy, not punishing the people who were manipulated into serving it." The hearing continued for another 2 hours, with committee members asking detailed questions about specific operations, chains of command, and the mechanisms used to maintain secrecy. Maria answered everything truthfully, holding nothing back even when the truth painted her in an unflattering light. When it was finally over, she felt drained but oddly peaceful. For 3 years, she had carried the weight of her actions alone, believing herself to be a criminal fleeing justice. Now, at last, the truth was out. She had been a criminal, but she had also been a victim, manipulated, lied to, and used by people who perverted her sense of duty for their own ends. As the committee members filed out, Senator Warren approached the table where Maria still sat. "Mrs. Mitchell, I want you to know that what you've done here today took tremendous courage. It's not easy to admit when we've been wrong, especially when that admission comes with serious consequences." "It wasn't courage," Maria replied quietly. "It was just time. Past time, really. I should have done this 3 years ago when I first started having doubts. Maybe. But you did it now when it matters most. We have enough evidence to begin arrests within the week, and your testimony will be crucial in securing convictions." The senator paused, studying Maria's face. "What will you do now?" It was a question Maria had been asking herself for weeks. The life she had built as Maria Santos was over. Too many people now knew her real identity for her to maintain that cover. Black Viper was a name that would forever be associated with both terrible crimes and the courage to expose them. She was caught between identities, no longer the naive recruit who had believed in simple justice, but not yet sure who she was becoming. "I honestly don't know," she admitted. "For the first time in my adult life, I don't have orders to follow or a mission to complete. I suppose I'll have to figure out how to be Sarah Mitchell again, whoever that turns out to be." Richardson approached as Senator Warren walked away. "There's something else we need to discuss," he said quietly. "Something I didn't want to bring up during the hearing." He led Maria and Helen to a secure conference room where they could speak privately. Once the door was closed and the electronic countermeasures activated, his expression grew serious. "Kellner wasn't the head of this organization," he said bluntly. "He was middle management, taking orders from someone higher up the chain, and that someone knows we've exposed him."
Maria felt her stomach clench. How do you know? Helen opened her laptop and showed them a series of intercepted communications. We've been monitoring chatter in certain intelligence circles since yesterday. There are contract teams being assembled, wet work specialists being recalled from overseas assignments. Someone is planning a comprehensive cleanup operation. The implications were clear. Exposing Operation Clean Slate had been only the beginning of the battle, not the end. The people at the top of the conspiracy were preparing to eliminate everyone who could testify against them, starting with the 3 people in this room. How long do we have? Maria asked, her mind already shifting back into tactical mode. Days, maybe hours, Richardson replied. They'll want to move fast, before we can provide additional testimony or identify more evidence. Maria stood up and began pacing, her training taking over as she analyzed their situation. They were known quantities now, their locations compromised, their activities under surveillance. Staying ahead of professional hunters would be exponentially more difficult than it had been when she was running alone. But they also had advantages they hadn't possessed before: official protection, legal immunity, and most importantly, public attention. The existence of Operation Clean Slate was no longer a secret. It would be front-page news within hours, making dramatic action against its exposers much more difficult to cover up. We need to go public immediately, Maria decided. Full disclosure, media interviews, everything on the record. Make it impossible for them to silence us without creating a massive scandal. Helen nodded approvingly. I've already contacted several investigative journalists who specialize in intelligence community stories. They're prepared to publish everything within hours of getting our authorization. And I've arranged protective custody through channels that Operation Clean Slate doesn't control, Richardson added. Military intelligence has clean units that were never compromised. They're standing by to provide security until the arrests are complete. Maria looked at these 2 people who had risked everything to expose the truth, and felt something she hadn't experienced in years: genuine respect for the people she was working with. They weren't using her for their own agenda or manipulating her with half-truths. They were simply trying to do the right thing, whatever the cost. Let's finish this, she said quietly. 3 hours later, the story broke simultaneously across multiple news outlets. Video of Maria's congressional testimony, audio recordings of Kellner's confessions, and detailed documentation of Operation Clean Slate's activities flooded the internet and television news broadcasts. The scope and audacity of the conspiracy dominated every news cycle, forcing politicians and intelligence officials to respond to questions they couldn't answer without admitting complicity. Maria watched the media coverage from a safe house outside Washington, protected by a detail of military police officers who had been personally selected by Richardson. The old colonel had called in every favor he had accumulated over 35 years of service, creating a network of protection that would be difficult for even sophisticated adversaries to penetrate. But as she watched the news, Maria realized that her story had become something larger than any of them had anticipated. The revelation that America's intelligence community had been corrupted by criminal conspiracies sparked nationwide protests, congressional investigations, and calls for fundamental reform of oversight mechanisms. She had become the face of a movement she hadn't intended to create. Her phone rang, displaying a number she didn't recognize. Maria almost didn't answer, but something about the timing made her curious. "Hello, Sarah," said a voice she recognized but hadn't heard in years. "This is General Patricia Morrison. I believe we need to talk." General Morrison had been Maria's first commanding officer, the woman who had recommended her for special operations training. She was also one of the few senior military officers that Maria still trusted implicitly. "General," Maria replied carefully. "I wasn't sure you'd want to be associated with me after today's revelations." "On the contrary," Morrison said firmly. "What you did today was the most honorable action I've seen from anyone in the intelligence community in decades. You put truth and justice ahead of personal safety, which is exactly what we trained you to do." There was a pause before Morrison continued. "Sarah, I'm calling because I want to offer you something. A chance to use your skills for legitimate purposes, with full oversight and accountability. We're forming a new unit specifically tasked with rooting out corruption in intelligence operations. We need someone who understands how these systems can be perverted and how to recognize when they're being misused. Maria felt a spark of something she hadn't experienced in years: hope. The possibility of redemption, of using her dark expertise to prevent others from being manipulated as she had been. What would that involve? She asked. Internal investigations, oversight of classified operations, training new operatives to recognize and resist illegal orders. Essentially, you'd be our institutional conscience, the person who asks the hard questions and makes sure we never create another Operation Clean Slate. It was an opportunity to transform herself from weapon to guardian, from destroyer to protector. After years of running from her past, someone was offering her a chance to make that past meaningful in a positive way. "I'll need guarantees," Maria said slowly. "Full legal immunity, complete operational transparency, and the authority to investigate anyone regardless of rank or position." "Done," Morrison replied without hesitation. "The Secretary of Defense has already signed off on those terms. Sarah, we need you. The country needs you. You've proven that you're willing to sacrifice everything for the truth. Now help us build systems that make such sacrifices unnecessary." Maria looked around the safe house, at Richardson and Helen, who had risked their lives to expose the truth, at the television screens showing the beginning of what would likely be the largest intelligence scandal in American history. 3 years ago, she had walked away from everything she believed in because those beliefs had been corrupted. Now, someone was asking her to help restore them. "When do I start?" she asked, as the sun set over Washington, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Maria felt something she hadn't experienced since her first day in basic training, the sense that she was exactly where she belonged, doing exactly what she was meant to do. The girl from Chicago who had joined the military to make a difference had finally found her way home. Black Viper was dead, but Sarah Mitchell, guardian of justice, protector of truth, and defender of the innocent, was very much alive, and for the first time in years that felt like enough.